I'm Jeff Lewis, the president of the Texas State Wireless Association and the president of Verticom, a wireless infrastructure services company I founded 15 years ago. On behalf of the 1,100 TXWA members, the 200 Verticom associates, I would like to thank all of you for your participation in the 6th annual South Wireless Summit. How many of you have been here, have come for more than 2 years? 3 years? 4 years? All right, who's been here all 6 years besides Steve? Okay, well, I do appreciate all of your participation. As many of you know, it takes an enormous amount of effort and time to put something like this together. I would ask real quick that you join me in a round of applause for Steve and all the volunteers. If you're a volunteer, could you stand up real quick? Are there any volunteers? Okay, I would also like to thank the exhibitors and the other speakers. I think those that were able to listen to Jonathan and Jay speak this morning, we understand how fortunate we were to get their perspective on what I feel is a great time in the industry. I feel like for those of you that have been around a long time, we are on the beginning of another great cycle in our industry if all things line up with deregulation and all of the potential spend around the 5G. So it feels great again to be standing up here with a story that is somewhat optimistic, but it's not rosy per se. So today I have a chance to moderate a panel about the future of enterprise HetNet and deployment. We will take a look at the historical industrial wireless timelines. I'll break down the future of 5G architecture from a non-technical point of view. And then we'll end with some HetNet, how it plays a key role. And finally, we'll have some key stakeholder discussion from our panel up here. Representing the key stakeholders from an enterprise HetNet standpoint, we've got Chris Kimbrough with CBRE from the building owner perspective. From the neutral host company perspective, we have Kaur Brombat with Extenet Systems. From the OEM standpoint, we've got Patrick Hinkle from JMA Wireless. And from an integrator standpoint, it'll be me, Jeff Lewis, from Verticom. Before I move on, I want to call your attention one more time to these events that are coming up in our industry. The WIA, the Wireless Infrastructure Show, is in mid to late May in Orlando this year. And then the HetNet Expo, which is sponsored by the HetNet Forum, is in October in Palm Beach, Florida. Two great, very important, informative conventions. So I think perspective is a powerful tool, and history is a great predictor of the future. When we look at the history of the industrial revolutions, and we look at wireless trends over the last 35 years, there you go. You can see certain things have happened. In 1784, we had the first industrial revolution with steam power and mechanical production. The second was in 1870 with the adoption of electric power in the assembly line. And the third was in 1969 with the widespread use of electronics, microprocessors, and automated production. Notice that each of these industrial revolutions were about 100 years apart. So today we're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, which started in 2015, which is just 45 years from the last. And it involves cyber physical systems, sensory connecting things via broadband networks. And I want to mention something that just came out on the news today for those of you that watch CNBC Squawk Box. How many of you are familiar with Elon Musk and some of his great companies that he has going on? Today, he announced the potential for his fourth startup, which is called Neuralink. It's basically a brain implant technology that will allow you to interact with devices or basically augment human reality, which is an awful lot to say when you think about where we are as an industry. But here is a guy that's launching spacecraft to Mars, that's invented solar systems, and he's in the midst of an electrical car generation that also feeds our industry. It's amazing to think that if this is a 45-year spectrum, I'm 47, so what is going to happen in the next 45 years? So all of us in this room, whether we believe it or not, we are right on the edge with a front row seat to watch the wireless industry advance our country forward, and it's all speed of current breakthroughs has no historical precedence. When compared with previous industrial revolutions, the fourth is evolving at an exponential rather than a linear pace. Moreover, and Jay Brown mentioned this morning, it's disrupting every single industry in every country. Pretty fascinating to be where we are. So let's look at the wireless evolution, if you will. So the history of wireless technology reveals that every 10 years there's a new generation that gets deployed. The first network was in 1982. 2G systems became commercially available in 1992 at average speeds of 75K. 3G technology became available in 2001 at speeds of roughly 1 meg, and then basic LTE 4G networks were standardized in 2012 at average speeds of 12 meg with around 35 milliseconds of latency. So today, the 4G and LTE advanced networks are still being built and upgraded, but the carriers are trying to recoup their expected returns from the massive CapEx that they've spent by strategically timing the next generation upgrades to their networks. The preliminary targets for 5G are 1 gig connection speeds with latency less than 1 millisecond. So let's put this in perspective. From 2G to 3G, we went up 900%. From 3G to 4G, we saw 1100% increase. So from 4G to 5G, the prediction is an 8,000% increase in speeds. Imagine what we can do with that. So there's a historical perspective on where we are as a country and where the wireless industry is. So now again with the asterisk, this is a non-technical representation of the 5G network architecture, and I'm hoping you can actually read that. So here's where we are with the future of 5G broadband network architecture. The traditional layers of core and macro will see some changes, but the major changes will occur at the micro and the user levels. You heard Jay again talk about the small cells. That's a big part of what the micro level is. The general trend in 5G architecture is to move the concepts of each layer towards the edge of the network. So we've talked a lot about what the trend is. Well, you have to think about what happened. How many of you remember, and this will reveal your age, so don't be afraid, the AS400 world with dumb terminals? Okay, one guy's not afraid to reveal his age, that's great. So AS400 with dumb terminals was, when I came out of college, that's what we had at the IBM world. We went to a true client-server architecture, and that's really what is happening with the wireless network evolution. We are moving all of the processing power and the data storage as close to the edge as possible. So when you talk about mini data centers, you talk about the relevancy of the macro network, it's still very, very relevant. Imagine a data center contained in each of the cellular structures at the base of the tower. All of the microprocessing power pushed to the edge. So the yellow highlighted area represents the HetNet layer, and that's close to a $15 billion a year spend today with projected compounded annual growth rates between now and 2021 of 30%. So we've seen what the data projection growth rates are, but here's a spending fact. 15 billion growing 30% a year over the next 5 years. Okay, so HetNet is vital, without a doubt, to the future densification of broadband networks in the 5G architecture. So let's talk about what happens in terms of why the carriers, why these companies would actually invest in the 5G architecture. So this slide shows you some of the secondary use cases. Okay, so smart energy grids, more efficient energy distribution and consumption through remote control and automation. E-health and telemedicine, I think it was Arthur Anderson that predicted $305 billion in healthcare cost savings from connected devices and better rural coverage. When I think of telemedicine, I start to think of latency. A car traveling at 60 miles per hour down the road, the latency impact of going from 4G to 5G from 34 milliseconds to 1 millisecond represents 3 feet. So traveling 60 miles an hour, the latency moves to, equates to 3 feet. Imagine what that means in terms of a surgical procedure with a doctor in, let's say, India or China performing a kidney operation on someone in the United States. 3 feet's a lot, but we're not talking about a car here. We're talking about, perhaps centimeters. So those things are definitely relevant, and 5G architecture plays an awful important role into the potential for e-health and telemedicine. The next one is surveillance and FirstNet. I know we're all excited about the potential award of FirstNet, the $6 billion that the winning carrier will receive, which will be remarkably close to the amount they paid when the FCC did not allow them to merge with T-Mobile, if you all remember those days. So, yeah. All right, lastly, smart cities, industries, and factories. Last night at dinner, we also talked about smart people. We talked about all these things that are happening, and today we're going to get into a deeper discussion about the enterprise and how those things play a key role. But humanoids and robotic engineered systems and algorithms to enhance process flow. We are building these networks to become more efficient. And remember, the enemy is not in the room. The enemy is overseas. The United States has a mission to build out these networks faster than the other countries. So if we lost the 3G race, which is pretty common, the United States lost that race, but we won the 4G race. So 5G really is the tiebreaker from a global standpoint. Initial network builds for 5G will pave the way for secondary use case development. These revenue opportunities are very real, but will take more time to evolve and show up on the bottom line. Okay, so we're drilling down here. We've talked a lot about the industrial revolutions. We've talked about wireless evolution. We've talked about the 5G architecture and the key components for HetNet. And now we went through the secondary use cases. So now let's talk about the primary use cases, which really will lead us into our discussion for today. So, and again, Jay and both Jonathan mentioned these earlier. Carriers and other firms are willing to invest in 5G due to the primary use case revenue and profit possibilities. We are a for-profit industry. People are trying to make money. In order to do so, the CapEx ROI models have to make sense. So everybody knows the Internet of Things. Okay, so without a doubt, we're talking about over 100 billion connected devices and 1 trillion network sensors. Everything connected, and connections aren't free, so you can make money there. The second primary use case is the connected vehicles. We've talked a lot about that already today. So here's a fact, and Jay alluded to this. Each autonomous vehicle will send 25 gig of data per hour to the cloud. So comprehend that for a second. So that's 12 HD movies per hour per vehicle sent to the cloud. So go back a previous slide when we talk about where are we going to store all this data and how are we going to process all the data calls. As the 5G networks are built and HetNet builds them or plays a role in that, everything moves out to the edge. And it's pretty fascinating to see how connected cars are going to produce all this data. So autonomous vehicles produce big data, and data storage is not free. So box 3, the yellow box. So smart home and enterprise. So all homes and enterprises will require high-speed broadband connectivity or else. So what does the or else mean? Has anyone in here purchased a new home in the last 6 months? Okay, so there is I have a colleague that works with me. He and I were talking last week, and he mentioned how he used Remax. And he said, yes, Remax actually has part of one of the filters on their website. You can list broadband connectivity requirement. So that's what they're doing now. So we have the ability to just say, I don't want to live in an area that doesn't have broadband connectivity. And the same applies to commercial spaces. And I don't know if there's an app out there that does this for commercial space, but think about it. If I'm moving my company to a different office enterprise location, I have to have high-speed broadband connectivity or else. And lastly, we can talk about the gaming and entertainment aspect of the primary use case. So you've got artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, live gaming, high-definition video, streaming user experiences. So, for those of you that don't know me, I have 5 children at home, and so I believe I'm actually a little incubator laboratory case study for our industry. At any point in time in my house, you can have my 8-year-old streaming video or watching YouTube. She loves to watch YouTube shows. I've got another son that's watching Netflix, another son playing Xbox Live. All these things suck on the network, and I'm trying to watch my AT&T wireless box TV during a football game, and all of a sudden it starts to freeze up like the Poltergeist movie. So you can understand the importance of having broadband connectivity when it comes to gaming and entertainment. So end user experiences are very, very vital. The demand for those connections are high, and end users are willing to pay for them, and in my case, I should say the parents are willing to pay for them. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper. Okay, so this slide represents the in-building HetNet ecosystem, and that's really why we're here today. Over the last 5 years, large venue space made up of the 500,000 square foot facilities. That's been the primary focus for DAS and other HetNet installations. And in fact, a lot of analysts have said that that large venue space is now 80% built out. So where does that leave us? That takes us to the next tier down, or tier 2, or the middle prize, which is really what we want to talk about today. In that middle prize space between 100,000 and 500,000 square feet, there's roughly 128,000 venues. So I can't do math in my head like this anymore, but 128,000 times 500 square feet is a lot of square footage, okay? And we have to cover it somehow with these in-building networks. So enterprise HetNet opportunity is large, but here's the issue. The value proposition has to change, and it has to be reflected in the deployment models for the key stakeholders in the ROI to work. So here are the critical success factors, and we'll look at this before we dive into the panel questions. So what needs to happen? What needs to happen now? So the 4 primary critical success factors for the future of enterprise HetNet deployments, and again, this is just one man's opinion. Convergence to one system with shared head-end cabling and common distribution points. And think about it, what we're talking about is one network, and all carriers walking into a room and agreeing, yes, let's just jump on the same network. It's a very hard concept. It's a competitive environment. Some of you compete against each other in here, and the carriers are no different. They're warming up to the idea as we'll hear a little bit later. The second issue is it has to be a scalable design. As we talk about 5G, the designs have to support C-RAN, multiple operators, multiple frequencies, multiple bands, multiple devices, and multiple technologies. No longer are we in an environment where a carrier goes to a commercial structure and says, you've got 40 people on floor number 4 that use AT&T. I'm going to go in there and sell them 40 handsets. Therefore, I can kind of justify my CapEx investment to put a DAS into that space. It doesn't quite work that way, at least even at Verticom. We do provide company phones, but people bring in their own devices every single day. And how they connect to the network really doesn't matter. It's their own service, and if they want to use a different broadband provider other than the one that we recommend, it's their business. And they have to be able to have the connectivity that they want. The third one is public safety. This is an interesting fact. I didn't know this until I came here last year. But in terms of E911, it's a two-dimensional world. It's latitude and longitude where they cross. When you start talking about high-rise structures, yeah, you can pinpoint the building someone's in, but can you pinpoint the vertical location of where they are, which is the third dimension. So when we talk about public safety, it's very important to be able to have a system that can be used by the first responders. And then finally, which is really one of the things I love because I'm a finance guy at heart, is the shared CapEx model. How do we get to a collaborative environment in the industry HetNet space where we have building owners and neutral host companies sharing CapEx, and the carriers only making some form of an OpEx lease payment? The carriers are very used to paying a lease, right? They are very, very comfortable making a lease payment. When you talk about CapEx, again, they're not willing to walk in and say, here's $500,000 to build out a DAS, and then another one comes right behind it and says, here's another $500,000 for my system. It just doesn't really work that way anymore. So they're less reluctant to do that. And fortunately, we've got some people here today that can help us talk about that model and how neutral host companies can go in with one common shared infrastructure, and then all we need is Chris to sell it to all the operators and we'll be good. Okay, so what is the solution? It's really a showdown between DAS and small cell. However, they can live together to solve different problems or use cases. DAS can provide easier multi-carrier support But small cells, in principle, are less expensive and can potentially allow Wi-Fi to run on the same infrastructure. And don't forget the backhaul design. It's critical to avoiding bottlenecks for routing the traffic on and off the macro network. All right, so who do we have with us today and what are we going to talk about? Okay, so to my far right, I have Patrick Henkel with JMA Wireless. I introduced him earlier. Patrick leads the delivery of network function virtualization software-based solutions at JMA, and who is a leading innovator in mobile wireless enterprise connectivity solutions. And he has over 25 years of product and business development experience in the industry. To my immediate right is Kaur Brambot with HetNet Systems, representing the neutral host companies. Kaur develops distributed RAN and EPC-based solutions for the HetNet CTO office and has 18 plus years of telecom industry experience. And until last night's dinner, I thought he won the most degrees award for the panel, but we're going to talk about something here in a second. So he has a Master of Science in Information Systems, a bachelor's degree in Computer Engineering, and an Electronics Engineering degree. So we're glad to have Kaur. And then to my left, most people know Chris already. She is with CBRE. Chris manages the telecom advisory practice there. It's the world's largest commercial real estate services and investment firm. She's got over 15 years of telecom industry experience, and for the last 2 years, she's focused on bringing in-building broadband solutions to enterprise clients as the fourth utility. Please welcome the panel. So I have some prepared questions. I'm going to start by asking a few open-ended ones to get some dialogue going. As with the theme with the rest of today, if you have a question or something's on your mind, just raise your hand and we'd love to hear from you. We want this to be interactive. We want to answer as many questions as possible. So I'll start with Chris. So Chris, what do you see as the biggest trends in the enterprise HetNet space right now? And how is your firm solving your customers' problems?
That's a big question. I think the biggest trend that I've seen over the past 2 years, I think there are a few things going on. I think one is that we're really seeing a shift towards an understanding that this is the fourth utility and that you really don't, it's not an amenity. That, if you have a need for signal in the building, you have a need for signal in the building. The carriers aren't going to pay for it. You're going to have to pony up. That's a hard pill to swallow, but I do think we're coming to that point, and we're coming to the point where enterprise is more interested, where ownership is more interested in owning that asset and finding a way to monetize it for themselves, as opposed to, maybe letting somebody else come in and own that, and have control over the asset. That's not across the board. I'm not saying that that there isn't a place for other ownership models, but I do think that there is a trend towards really understanding what that infrastructure is worth. The other thing I think that we're seeing is that, and one of the things that I'm trying to educate on is that that infrastructure is a common infrastructure. You're not strictly you're not maybe strictly solving for a cellular issue. Once you get that fiber infrastructure in, you can hang a whole bunch of stuff off of it. We are very focused at CBRE. We have a smart buildings practice. We're focused on other kinds of technology, on IoT, on bringing really world-class solutions to our clients. And part of that is, understanding how that common infrastructure that you can pay for, that you can invest in, how all of the different technologies that you can hang off of it, and what that means in terms of long-term investment, in terms of data management, building management, the value, increasing the value of your asset, as well as solving for cellular. Those are the two big shifts, I think. I don't get the question. The first question used to be, how much money can I get from the carriers for rent? Because that's what the ROI was based on, and I don't get that question really anymore. It's a year and a half.
Kaur, why don't you take a shot?
Yeah, so what we are seeing is in general a trend where our customer base is shifting. We are seeing more of building owners and venue owners part of our customer base, and to that end we are seeing more of a holistic approach towards the converged infrastructure. By converged infrastructure, we mean that a common infrastructure, what Jeff alluded, that supports both the needs of IT as well as wireless, and so what we are seeing is that the advent of CBRS and shared networks will further drive that trend, And in terms of technical trends, we are seeing that the small cells and Mac mobile edge computing will play a much larger role in the architectures of such networks. This is very exciting times, both from a neutral host point of view and from the whole ecosystem point of view. That we're coming to see these technological advancements that will really help us migrate through this this era where we can meet these really low latency, high throughput requirements and support those use cases that are very relevant to enterprise space. Thank you.
So, Patrick, what do you see as the biggest trends right now in enterprise HetNet space?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Well, as Jeff briefly mentioned, I'm with JMA Wireless, and we provide a comprehensive lineup of wireless infrastructure products, including a distributed antenna system. And as you might expect with our DAS, we've been very successful in the typical venues, large stadiums, arenas, large, premium office space, that sort of thing. More recently, we've seen a willingness for the enterprise to sort of force the issue by being willing to invest in the infrastructure themselves. So by taking that step, they're shifting the economics, they're making it more feasible, so to speak, for the carriers to be willing to provide service, not just in these big, high-profile facilities, but in the middle price or down market, so to speak. That, in large part, is come about through things like education. We're finding we have a more educated buyer now. They understand the technology and understanding it, not just the technology, but some of the challenges that the carriers may have in delivering service in some cases. We've seen this shift, and we expect that to grow. So that's good news for all of us, clearly for in-building wireless and so forth. And with that, working with companies like the property management companies, neutral hosts, which we feel will play a critical or pivotal role. We see some new economic models emerging. In terms of how we've sort of facilitated that, from our perspective, it's not about the technology. The technology in that sense really hasn't changed. It's more about education and awareness. So the more that we work with enterprises or their representatives, educating them in terms of what their options are and so forth, we're starting to see the shift throughout the industry.
Right. So let's take a look now at maybe the architecture piece. And when we talk about that, so what I'm wanting to know now is what does the enterprise HetNet architecture look like over the next 6 to 12 months? And talk about DAS versus small cell, convergence, or signal source. Howard, why don't you start with that?
And so what we are seeing as a trend, and what Jeff also mentioned in the beginning part of his presentation, we are seeing a trend where the functionality, the capability is coming closer to the edge of the network. Right? So when that happens, what that allows us is that small cells and vRAN, cloud RAN, centralized RAN, these become more relevant to enterprise because now you're talking about the actual functionality and capability at the edge of the network. So it's more relevant to enterprise related to DAS. And large public venues like millions of square feet and above, we still see that DAS is very much relevant. So these distributed RAN architectures, they will provide a key role in developing the type of architectures we will see in coming days, and particularly the ability to build the networks that are scalable, flexible, and modular. And our partners like JMA, they're also working very closely with us to develop such solutions. So I think these are really exciting times to partner and forces such distributed networks play a key role.
First of all, I like the term HetNet. It's essentially about taking different products and solutions that are of generally different size and scale and so forth and making them work together. That's a great concept. But if you think of it from a customer's perspective, they don't really know what that means. What they want is a homogeneous network. They want it to work the same way when they're in the office or when they're commuting on public transportation or they're relaxing at home with their kids. And so it's really about providing a service that's consistent everywhere. And And if you think about it that way, and you try to look at it from a customer's perspective, sometimes being in the industry, we lose sight of that. We think more about the technology than the solutions. And so I love the debate about small cell versus DAS, but I don't like to think of it as all or nothing or one size fits all, or the typical boundaries where, on the low end you have the eFemtos, and the high end you have the DAS, and the small cells littered in between. In the short term, what we've been trying to do is to find creative solutions that I like to think of as hybrids. So you may go into a facility where you have both, and there are clearly cases for that. And we've been doing some things in the last year that have really proven successful in combining solutions with, say, a small footprint enterprise small cell or eFemto as an RF source, which are often easier to obtain from the carrier, and the DAS. So you get a nice combination of capacity and coverage. It's very cost effective in many cases, and it allows you to build solutions that are more tailored to what the customer wants, which generally is, in sort of middle enterprises, generally multi-operator and common infrastructure. So that's probably the projection for the short term, 6 to 12 months, kind of these hybrid solutions. I think if you look a little bit past that, you'll start to see some, maybe a new class of product emerging. And if you were to picture taking a DAS with its benefits, multi-operator combining and distribution, with a small footprint base station and just kind of smashing together, think of it that way as a more integrated solution. And that drives the economics down, better costs, and sort of the best of both worlds.
Patrick, when you're talking about the hybrid solutions, what size venues are you talking about in general? Are you talking about middle price?
That's a good question. I don't like to think in terms of just square footage delineation. I think we have to think about the use within the building. But I'd say, if we were to ask, I'd say between, say, 100,000, 250,000 square feet, somewhere in that range.
So you're deploying building-specific solutions as opposed to a centralized solution that feeds several buildings?
Well, it comes down to where is that signal source and how do you
Yeah.
connect the buildings. You could centralize the baseband portion of that. It's not to say that they have to be co-located by any means, but you obviously have to have the appropriate connectivity from the signal source of the base and the DAS.
So do you think that, looking ahead, that the future is more towards, especially if you're talking those 100,000, 200,000 square foot buildings, is it more towards providing those individual hybrid solutions, or that it's towards maybe centralizing signal source to really bring that?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think in some respects, I'm going to put Kara on the spot. I mean, it comes down to the service entity, the neutrons or what have you, and how they're positioned to offer the service. So you could have a data center, so to speak, where the baseband is an appropriate front haul network to each of the facilities. And we've seen that work perfectly well also. So again, it's not either or, you can centralize or decentralize. I don't think you have to draw a hard line for that.
So Chris, let me ask you then, so what would you say the building owners, what are their priorities right now in terms of, in their points of view on their building? Fourth utility, coverage, capacity, aesthetics and footprint, mixed use needs, what would you say
Yes.
the priorities are? All the above?
I mean, when you're talking about, when we manage, the estimate is 2.4 billion square feet. So, I mean, it goes the full spectrum of what their, what their concerns are, and that's what's difficult for, I think, telecom selling into commercial real estate is, I think we know what commercial real estate is trying to solve for. And I was just talking to somebody earlier, and I've talked to 5 properties in the past 2 weeks, and each time I was surprised by not only what they were trying to solve for specifically, but how they were trying to solve for it in terms of, like, are we going to use existing infrastructure? How can we, how can we get the tenants to pay for part of it? Are we going to pay for all of it? Who's going to, who do we want to own the system? Do we not want to own the system? So I think that all of these different, it really runs the gamut of what their priorities are. And also, from my point of view, the priorities are also like, we have ownership priorities, but we also, if you're looking for space, if you need more office space, I'm happy to put you in touch with our tenant reps. Because we can tell you what your broadband connectivity is gonna look like in your new space. But, we also work on that side of the business, and we have a tenant rep play. And their concerns for tenants, of course, are vastly different than ownership, so.
Great. So last night we also had a very good discussion about this concept. And one of the things that came up was my background. When I got out of college, I went to work for Kimberly Clark, and then I went to work for Ernst & Young's Kenneth Leventhal real estate-focused industry group. So I was sharing that with Chris. And one of the projects I was on, this is in 1996, we were rolling up multifamily properties. So we had built this back, this will tell you, it was back in Lotus 1, 2, and 3, so that gives you a hint. So it was 1, 2, 3, and we were building these 10-year NOI models, discounted cash flow models, and discounting them back for net present value per multifamily property. And what we were doing is their cost of capital in 1996 was about 12 to 15%, depending on where it was located in the regional partnership. So what we did is we took their portfolio of about 65 properties, and they had San Francisco, Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago. We started to bundle them 10 to 12 at a time, and then go out to GE Capital and say, hey, look, we've just spread the risk of the cash flow in this model across the geographic presence of each location. We were able to get the CapEx, cost of capital down to 8.5%. So from 15 to 8.5%. So the reason I bring it up is last night we started talking about instead of the carriers paying for it or the neutral host companies paying for it, Chris said, well, actually the building owners now are starting to look at this and try to potentially monetize it. She doesn't like that word, but they're trying to maybe monetize it where they put fiber in their buildings. It decreases the potential for occupancy to go down. I don't know if that was a double negative, but the point is it helps solidify and reduce risk from the cash flow model when you have a great fiber infrastructure in your asset. So bundling these assets together, what does the model look like in 6 to 12 years? I don't know. But Jonathan's slide, which I love, is it's frequency, it's technology, and it's infrastructure. So let's move frequency off this conversation for a second. So what these guys are talking about is the technology. How do you smash it together, as he said? How do you smash the technology together to bring the small cell and the DAS concepts in one unit, if you will? And then what's the infrastructure look like? What are the distribution points? So it's pretty interesting to look out over the horizon over the next 6 to 12 months and what some of the priorities are. So let me shift gears now. These gentlemen have a lot of experience, and so does Chris, with large venues. So what lessons have we learned from the large venue build-out? And we'll start with Patrick on that. What can you share, maybe?
Large venues, okay. Of course, being a DAS provider, we have a lot of experience, large, high-profile venues, and we've been successful there. But the thing is, the usage in that type of venue versus an enterprise is totally different. The coverage requirements, the capacity requirements, even the mix of devices and the way the devices are used. In a stadium, upload, for instance, is much more important than maybe in an enterprise. So the way you tune the network, they're really different environments. So you have to understand that. And I think in part, that's led to some perception issues for DAS solutions. And it's understandable. So when you deploy in an NFL stadium that's going to host the Super Bowl, it's complicated. There are a lot of things to consider. It takes a long time to plan. It's costly to design and deploy and so forth. And I think in a lot of respects, because of that, there's an industry perception that DAS is not reachable cost-wise for an enterprise, that it's too expensive, it's too complicated. And our experience is that, or our view is that's simply not the case. It's a perception issue. It's something that we've had to overcome. It's one of the reasons we've invested quite a lot of time in supporting partners and customers in many cases in sort of the middle enterprise space to sort of re-educate them, get over that perception. And again, it's not as much the technology, it's more about how do you apply the technology
right for the particular building or venue. So, I remember having discussions about, well, we can't go after a building of this certain characteristic size or what have you because it's just going to be cost prohibitive. Well, if you look at it differently and design differently, the realization is that that's really not the case. So that's probably the biggest learning that we've taken away recently.
Keller, what about you? What's HetNet's experience with large venue? What kind of lessons learned?
Yeah, I think in general what we've seen is that the capacity and the bandwidth requirements are escalating, looking at the, high-profile venues, you look at stadiums or big public venues, everywhere, you're seeing people requiring more capacity, more dense environments, more bandwidth usage, streaming videos, uploading social networks. So those lessons learned are very much relevant in a big enterprise environment as well. What we are seeing is that with these escalating capacity and bandwidth requirements, there's a cost to continuously upgrade the network. So if you don't foresee far enough, right, you'll end up frequently upgrading the network. That's very, very costly. So one of the key lessons learned is that when you build the network, so that it can scale, right? And that is true for enterprise as well. You may start with a property that has a few floors of occupants, then all of a sudden it just increases very high, a lot of users coming in, the type of users are different, and then you have to scale and build the network. That is very costly. If you are smart enough in the beginning, then you can scale it. Also, flexibility, modularity, these are very, very important lessons. So I think these are relevant and we can directly apply to the enterprise use case as well.
Great. All right, let me switch to Chris real quick. So when we talk about,
Sorry, can I go back?
you can always go back, Chris, always.
No, because I was thinking about this, because when we had the pre-call about planning for this panel, the second pre-call, and you brought this question up and you asked me to answer it first, and I said no. Because because it's a question that I ask all the time of DAS integrators and third-party operators. What have you learned from large venues that you can apply to our properties? And the answer I generally get, and I appreciate both your answers, because the answer I generally get is, well, we've done the big ones, so the small ones are easier. But I think they're really talking, when they're saying that, they're talking about, well, we've designed for a stadium, so clearly we can design for a 200,000-foot office building. I mean, that's not what I'm asking, really. Because what I really want to know is more so what you're talking about, is like how does dealing with a large venue get you, earn you the ability to ask the right questions of the property owner to really try to determine what their needs are. When you're solving for a large venue, it is completely different than 200,000 square feet of office space. And it's not about, being able to create a design for it. It's about being able to listen and project manage it through to the end. But it's completely, in my mind, it's apples and oranges designing for a large venue versus what, we're trying to build a CBRE for the vast majority of our properties. So it was interesting when you asked me that. I'm like, yeah, I don't.
Well,
I want to hear what they have to say.
So expanding on that, though, from an integrator standpoint, typically a large venue, it's expected you're going to have people in there running structured cable, installing this large system. You get into these commercial enterprise spaces, site access, design. Design is so critical for all elements of our ecosystem when we do deployment. But if the design is not accurate, if the cable runs are not correct, if the right-of-ways and risers aren't exactly empty like they were supposed to be, it creates construction delays. So look, there's burden on integrators too. We want to be as efficient as possible, so the whole cost structure has to come down. You heard it earlier today. So we need the technology costs to come down. The integrators, we have to be extremely efficient in how we do this. So I guess the large venue lesson learned for us is, really having a solid design and not starting the project until we know for sure that it's been walked. All the paths. It's better to have one or two guys walk the entire project than bring a team of 10 out there and find some kind of a construction delay. Even though we might get a change order for it, it does not solve the problem of deploying the infrastructure as efficiently and cost effective as possible. That's the game we're all playing. Just because I got a change order doesn't mean that I won as the general contractor. I'd rather not get that. I'd rather get it done right the first time and move on.
Are there players involved in that process of deploying a DAS system in a large venue that maybe because there's been so much focus on deploying in large venues, they're kind of expected, like you have, that maybe aren't needed when you start moving towards enterprise spaces. When you're talking about efficiency, I mean, like, there's just like the site, I just see it from the site act side, there's like this very set process about how this goes about, and then as I work with smaller venues, I start to think, well, maybe we've overbuilt the system.
No, I agree with you. And it's not a ding on any outsourcers or any OEMs that want to do project management. But typically, these are not 18-month projects. These are not 12-month projects. These are not even 6 months or sometimes even 3-month projects. These are get in, do it right the first time, and move on. So I don't need Primavera as my project management software in a Gantt chart to tell me exactly how to do the installation. So to that question, we really need to just be a little bit cleaner in terms of line of command and chain of command. But also, besides design, facility access is so critical. A lot of times we're not allowed to talk to the vendor. All right, we get it, fine. We can't talk to them, but we need to get in to the facility to do the work. So it'd be nice to know who our point of contact is. And if we have to call you in an office somewhere to call them when we're standing at the door, it just doesn't seem like the model makes that much sense. So, okay, so let me move now to, besides capital, CapEx and infrastructure support, what are the OEMs and neutral host providers, what are they going to do in the HetNet revolution? So what else can you guys do besides CapEx and infrastructure support?
So besides the CapEx and infrastructure support, from a neutral host point of view, will play a key role in managing these networks. Also, it's very important that these networks are designed so that they keep focused on the enterprise use case. The needs of enterprise are sort of unique. The applications for enterprise, whether you're talking about video surveillance, push-to-talk, IoT, some of the unique use cases for enterprise, they need to be kept in mind. Neutral hosts can play a key role in that area as well. And shared networks, when CBRS and the shared networks come in, right, neutral hosts can play a key role in designing the networks and ensure that these use cases to leverage the shared network. So it helps to bring down the CapEx and OpEx and brings in the return of interest ROI a lot quicker. So overall, build and design these networks and manage them so that it can help justify the monetization of the investment. So that's some of the key areas that neutral host will focus on.
Well, sure. Beyond capital and infrastructure, I think the most important thing we're doing, I touched on this earlier, is education. We have a team that is focused on, we don't sell direct necessarily, we sell through partners, mutual hosts, system integrators, and so forth, carriers, but we have a team that's, their sole mission is to educate enterprise buyers, building owners, and the like. And that's self-serving. Obviously, that's where we want to sell equipment. But it's not, in-building cellular coverage isn't like Wi-Fi where you can go to Best Buy and you buy your gear. Acquiring the product, understanding how to engineer it, knowing what the implications are, the relationship to the macro, it's complicated. Enterprises are, their IT organizations, the building owners, they're not in a position to do this. And so, the middle enterprise is huge in terms of square footage and units. So our view is the more we can educate people, the more we have educated buyers, they're going to have a bias in our favor. And that's kind of how the role that we're playing to try to sort of break open what is really, I think, an underserved market right now.
Okay, we've got about 9 minutes left. I want to ask one more key question. This is really kind of the elephant in the room. And I'll start with you, Chris. So what does the partnership model look like between OEM, neutral host, and property owners? What does it look like that facilitates the acceleration of future enterprise HetNet deployments? Can you give us maybe give us the reality, but what is that? What's that dream model, the partnership model look like?
I don't think there envisage model, I think it's a very large sandbox, right? And I think that part of making this work is everybody, including the carriers, coming to terms with the fact that we've got such a huge universe that we have to serve with these solutions. And nobody can serve. We just went through, as part of building this platform, we went through, it's still in the process of going through an RFI process at CBRE for DAS vendors, working with DAS vendors. And one of the things, everybody's like, did you learn anything that kind of surprised you? And when you look at the universe that I, at least putatively, have to serve, and then what to date we have served, the universe of DAS vendors has served, the gap between those two numbers is staggering. I mean, it is just, mind-boggling. My biggest fear is that we just can't, because it's huge if it starts moving, if we do work well with the carriers and get them to, and find, elegant ways of, streamlining the provisioning of signal source, or, having centralized solutions for, provisioning signal source, or moving, as we move towards, LTU, or, all of these different solutions. I'm like, just getting the technology designed and installed, I think I just can't even wrap my head around how it's going to get done. And so, I think that part of it is, part of like the end, like my dream is just that, we're all working towards getting it done, as opposed to, elbowing each other in the face trying to get the deal. Because there are going to be a lot of deals, and everybody has their strengths. I think that there are a lot of vendors in this space. There are a lot of smart people, and it's, there's a lot. Like I said, it's a big sandbox. So I think we all need to find a way to really focus on the solution and not on everybody, grabbing for the one deal, because there is a much larger purpose to be served here.
I agree with that. Let's go.
Yeah,
Why don't you tell me what you think?
So, I think in general, I agree with what Chris mentioned. There is no one size that fits all, no one solution from a partnership model that works in all situations. Every situation is unique, and I think from a Neutralo's point of view, different partnership models exist from a revenue sharing, or different options are possible. I think the biggest challenge, or an opportunity, if you call, is how to monetize the investments. Right? Once we figure out that, then I think the business side, particularly between the OEMs and the venue owners and the neutral host, I think that is, we don't see it as a roadblock. We see those as enablers. That those will easily come in. Right? The part of the opportunity in monetizing these investments is how we build and operate efficient networks that helps reduce the capex, opex, quick return of investment. Those are the key enablers. Technology is going to play a key role, a driver in enabling solutions for where the operators, the building owners, the neutral hosts, and OEMs, they can all come together in a win-win situation and benefit the enterprise. So I think those are the key aspects we are looking for, right? Business agreements we will definitely we don't see this as a roadblock or as a hindrance.
As an equipment provider, on one level, I don't care if I sell to the carrier, the neutral host, or the end enterprise, but we are working on solutions that will bring the cost curves down. So the equipment solution prices will come down. There's a willingness to pay, I believe, in the middle enterprise. They're probably not as willing to pay as maybe some of these larger vendors. So we recognize that. I think in terms of the magic formula for the business model, I don't know what that is, but I do know the current model won't work. And what I mean by that is today there's usually a cost incurred by the carrier. The carrier pays a fee to somebody to join a system in a building, and carriers are under incredible pressure right now, economic pressure. There simply is not a willingness to pay, particularly in the middle enterprise. So to the extent that enterprises are willing to invest in the equipment, that's a significant step. To the extent that solution prices will be coming down, that's important. But I think ultimately, because the carriers have other costs, right? They have signal delivery, base station source, and so forth. And frankly, the thing that drives the carriers is ARPU, average revenue per unit. Going into a building doesn't increase ARPU, and it's churn, and you could argue whether or not, expanding presence in the middle enterprise, reduces churn. So I think whatever the business model is, we have to find a way where it's revenue neutral to the enterprise or to the carrier, if that's the right term. And so I think fundamentally that has to change. I think there's receptiveness to changing that, and I think we need, there are companies like HetNet and CBRE are leading kind of these initiatives. So I'm expecting we'll see, maybe it's not one business model, but we'll see some new models emerging that'll make this work for everybody.
Well, I think I've been on a lot of these in the past year or so, and we spend a lot of time agonizing about what business model is going to work for these, and we're not going to figure it out on the front end. The reality is vastly different than what we theorize, and we're, in the end, I'm learning through practice every day, and so I think that, there's like some quote that's attributed to MacArthur or something, and I'm going to mangle it, but it's like something like a good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan executed tomorrow. Like, we have a fairly good idea of what's going to work, and we're not going to nail down the details. There's not a one size fits all, and I think that, we have to move. We have a speed to market issue. We have a burgeoning problem within building connectivity, and so it's a matter of finding a way to educate and move it now, so that we don't have what I think Ron Perry called the DAS apocalypse.
Excellent. Well, so I would agree on a couple of things. Number one, there's not an easy button. Y'all have seen that commercial. It's just not, let's just slap the button and move on. However, today is a great example of the type of deliberation we need to have, a potential collaboration in the space, all of you in the room, talking with each other about what some of the unique solutions can be to solve this ecosystem problem in the HetNet enterprise space. We do have time for a couple questions. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask the panel or myself? Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure how to phrase this as a question, but you have venues like stadiums and casinos and hotels that every day are going to have different customer base, right? And then you have office buildings that are going to have 99% of the same people every single day. How do you develop and design? Well, I know how to do one that has different people every single day, or neutral hosts. That's what HetNet does. But for enterprise, do you speak to the building manager and let them know 80% of your customers are 18
It depends, but really, if you're talking about multi-tenant office space, you really want to solve for the worst possible case, right? You want to make sure that you have, in a perfect world, all four carriers in the building. You've got a lot of BYOD in enterprise. I carry, even if you have enterprise issued phones, I actually have a second phone. They happen to be both on the same carrier, but I know a lot of people that have two phones and they're not on the same carrier, and especially if you're talking millennials, they expect their personal phone to be able to work. They expect to take a 5-minute break and get on. I won't mention an app because I will surely get it wrong. So when we're talking about solving for that multi-tenant office space, we really are looking at solving for, something that's neutral, something that is going to, that if we have tenants move in and out, first of all, we want to reduce churn in tenancy, but if we have tenants moving in and out, we know that that they're not going to come in and say, oh, well, this carrier doesn't work here, or you have no cell service, and not look at our spaces. So we're, it's really that's what we're solving for, is we want it to be as neutral as possible. We want, level playing field, and we want to be able to provide the best solutions to our emerging tenants. So that's the hard thing.
So you would advise a building owner to build a neutral host grass if they don't have one Sprint customer?
Well, does Sprint need to be on the system? But you need a system that can accommodate all four carriers, correct? Yeah. It depends on the size, it depends on the investment strategy for the building. It depends on, what exactly they're trying to solve for. But if you are, Yes. If it, at all possible, because what happens if you have a tenant that has a large amount of space and you lose them and the next tenant that comes in has a large percentage of people that are use rent. But absolutely,
And then you have to convince Sprint to provide RS.
you would have to convince, yes, and that's why we were talking directly with the carriers about single source. Because we're out there educating our ownership, on this space, because it is a very complex space. It's not one the commercial real estate understands particularly well. It falls in, it's a big who you gonna call situation. It's not like IT or, the electric company, or if you need a POTS line. This is different, right? And so, we're out there educating, and our message to the carriers is we are doing that. We are out there, explaining the way this works. So in return, please. Is it? I can't remember. It's one of those that floats around the internet.
Good question. We have one right here, yes?
Are you seeing a lot of demand in school systems? I have 2 children in elementary school, and even now, it's bring your own device, and they're on for learning purposes all day long. Are you seeing that now, or not so much yet?
Why don't you guys take that?
Yeah, from our perspective, we've seen a lot of interest in deployments in higher ed, not so much in K through 12.
You're going to start seeing it soon, and it's just something to really think about, because like I said, I've got one in fifth, going to middle, and one going into kindergarten, and it is sent home on a weekly basis. Hey, we're on a BYOD schedule, your child can bring their device in, we are learning daily on our devices. So that's another industry it's going to boom, it's going to happen.
Yeah, we are also seeing the same trend, on the tier 2, tier 3 space. We are seeing a lot of customers. They are increasingly asking to support neutral solution inside the schools and academia and hospitals, where BYOD needs to be supported, and those are some of the realities that we have to design and build so that this can be supported.
When you do schools, are you seeing any aversion to having RF source in the building? Or because, you think about, when you think about site acquisition for towers and how, a lot of times you want to, like, school wants the revenue from a tower, but you get a lot of pushback from parents for having, that antenna on the property. And I'm just thinking, if you start bringing those antennas into the school, it's going to be interesting to see how that conversation evolves.
And I think, one thing I like to add is that, with the distributed networks, we are also seeing that the type of signal source that comes to the edge of the network is also evolving. Small cells, centralized RAN, cloud RAN, that simplifies the need for the huge antennas that we have typically seen in the metro environment. So, some of those aesthetics and related concerns are also addressed with this evolution of the distributed networks, distributed RANs. So that's why it's more relevant in the enterprise space rather than high-profile venues where it's common to see such big antennas. So that's why I think we are seeing the right trend that can facilitate such deployments.
I think it'll be interesting too, just because I'm still kind of classified as a millennial, so I understand. I want that data, I want it right now, like we were talking about. So I think you're going to see that trend, like we're okay with the antennas and everything we know that's needed to be there. So something to look
That's a
forward
good
to.
point.
That's a good question. My son's in 7th grade, and he has to bring a Chromebook to and from, and that rides off a Wi-Fi network. So I'm also a coach at the school, and when I go in there, it's really weird how they control that Wi-Fi, which is great. I love the fact that they can do that. They can control all that stuff. So I think that's great. But you're right. It's all coming. So listen, I want to thank everybody for listening to what we had to say today. Thank the panel one more time. So Steve had asked me to pass along a couple things. So the show starts tomorrow promptly at 10 a.m. Tonight the buses run from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. and the Acme Feed and Seed location opens at 6:30. For those that have never been there, it's a phenomenal venue, great view over the river at the Tennessee Titans Stadium. And you have to have your armband to get in, and it's a tight security thing. Okay, so look, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day.